So, Luke, now that we kind of have a feel for what the Harrison assessment is, could you explain how our companies collaborated to tailor this tool, like I just mentioned, for AEC project managers? Specifically, how does it measure some of the key competency strengths and areas for improvement that are essential for effective project management?
Yeah. Starting off, I'll explain that, like Collin was talking about, the Harrison will measure 175 behavioral tendencies, preferences, work environment, engagement factors for an individual. But the really important second thing that it does that Collin highlighted is it tells you the behaviors that matter for a specific job. And so that's what we set out to help you do in in project management. You asked us, hey, can we measure the behaviors that matter for different areas of project management, for initiating a project, for planning a project, all the way to executing, monitoring, and closing a project? And yes, the Harrison is a great way to do that. So that's what we did.
What if there was an assessment that could measure your strengths and weaknesses across the 5 project management process groups, specifically for architecture, engineering, and construction? Well, now there is the AEC PM Behaviors Assessment. And in this episode, I have with me Collin George and Luke Carter from Talent Matters, who worked with EMI to develop this tool. They're going to talk a little bit about what went into it and some of the value that can be driven from a tool that allows you to understand your strengths and weaknesses specifically to the type of work that you do, how it can help you, and how it can help your organization. But before I dive in with Luke and Collin, I have with me Bill Keene of Keene Wealth Advisors. And Bill's here because we've decided at EMI that we're going to launch an in-person AEC PM event called AEC PM Connect, with the purpose of bringing project managers in the industry together to share some strategies and concepts and trends. You know, how are their companies tackling some of these projects, and what can you learn from them, right? We want to share knowledge in the AEC industry. So, Bill, I wondered if you could just kind of give a little bit of a preview about Kansas City and the Kansas City engineering community for those project managers that are considered attending the event. And if you are considering attending, just check out our website for the event at aecpmconnect.com. Bill?
Absolutely, Anthony. First of all, my team and I at Keene Wealth Advisors are honored and excited to host this event at our headquarters here in Kansas City. Our space will make for great learning and collaboration with our large training facility, the state-of-the-art audiovisual, and 7 conference rooms to accommodate the various breakout groups throughout the day. And our 360-degree views from one of the top floors of the Lighton Tower will be an added bonus as well. I know we have attendees coming in from all over the country, and we hope that they are able to experience the unique blend of culture and innovation that defines Kansas City. We are known for our distinct style of slow smoked barbecue, which we've treated you to in the past, as well as our deep history of jazz music, our over 200 fountains, which attribute to us being called the City of Fountains, and of course, our love for our sports teams, the Kansas City Chiefs and Royals. And as you and I have discussed, Kansas City is also becoming a hub for innovation and engineering, as we are often referred to as the heart of the Midwest's Silicon Prairie. At our upcoming event, we will have speakers and panelists from Kansas City-based companies Transsystems, Burns & McDonnell, Terracon, and Henderson. And we expect to have attendees from other local firms such as Black & Veatch, HNTB, and J.E. Dunn, among others. Quite an impressive lineup of AEC firms in our city. And as a result, we've had the great fortune of enjoying the fruits of many major engineering projects. The new single-terminal Kansas City International Airport, the BNSF Intermodal Facility, the Kansas City Streetcar Project, the Kansas City SMART Initiative, and I can't leave off the new Kansas City Current Stadium build, the first soccer stadium built for a women's professional team, which continues to receive world recognition. Pretty cool. This is going to be a great event, not only with some incredibly talented presenters and participants, but anyone that's worked with you and your firm, the Engineering Management Institute, knows that anything you put out around training and development is always top-notch. And to top things off, as an added treat, we will end the learning portion of the day with former CEO of Burns & McDonnell, Greg Graves, giving a talk then being on site for the reception, signing copies of his recent best-selling book, Create Amazing. The reception will be from 5:30 to 7:30 and will be a great time for our participants and many AEC leaders to come together as well. We are very much looking forward to a great, productive event, Anthony.
All right, now I'd like to welcome our guests onto the show for today. Joining us are Collin George and Luke Carter from Talent Matters. Luke, Collin, welcome to the AEC PM podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anthony. Good to be here.
So I'm excited to have Luke and Collin with us today. At EMI, we've done a lot of work with Talent Matters in the past year plus on developing this AEC PM behaviors assessment, which we're going to talk a little bit about today and some of the things that we've learned. But just to get us started off, guys, could each of you share a little bit about your backgrounds and tell us about Talent Matters and kind of what you're doing on a daily basis? Luke, why don't you go first?
Sure. Yeah. First, I'll start off talking about Talent Matters. Our number one goal here is to help organizations to secure a competitive advantage through their people, and to do that in a way that is mutually beneficial to all parties concerned, which includes the organization meeting its goals, the client or the customer achieving and meeting its needs, their needs, and very importantly, the employees, the people that are part of that effort and actually doing all the work, that they're able to meet their goals and achieve a sense of fulfillment in doing that. And so what we're doing on a daily basis is we're creating customized tools for organizations to select the right people for the right role, not just finding people that can do the job, but people that will do the job because they're behaviorally suitable for the behavioral needs of the job. We help organizations to create custom leadership development programs to really build leadership at all levels, whether it's leadership of yourself, leadership of your tasks and projects, and very importantly, leadership of people or teams of people. And then lastly, helping companies to retain their talent by creating an environment where there are open conversations between leaders and their teams and their employees about what's important to them, the employee, and what's important to the organization, and how do you achieve both in a mutually beneficial way for that long-term sustained talent retention. And so as far as my background, prior to being part of a Talent Matters, I was an active engineer and leading engineering teams in the steel industry. And being part of that business was really helpful to me. And then prior to that, I was an infantry officer in the United States Marine Corps, leading infantry units around the world and training and readiness operations on ship and around the world. And every day we draw on those experiences. I know I do, to be able to relate to those we're working with, leaders we're training, and being able to give them insight of what it takes to build high performance teams and create a culture that people want to stick around because you're winning, you're achieving the goals you set out to achieve.
That's great. That's great. Collin, how about you?
Sort of a similar background to Luke's. Prior to joining Talent Matters, I actually was in the Army for 7 years, and a great experience for me. Got to visit a lot of different places and lead soldiers in a lot of different kinds of environments, which was really where I learned a lot about leadership personally. I continued to serve in the Army as a reservist now. I'm a battalion commander in the Army Reserves and a partner at Talent Matters. But that's just a little bit about me.
Yeah, it's great. And you know, we've been working with Talent Matters at EMI now for probably almost a couple of years now, and I've gotten to know Luke and Collin quite a bit, and also their other partner, Reed. And I know that they kind of all really lean on their backgrounds, military, engineering, some of their corporate work that Reed's done, to really be able to build programs that are very specific to the individual, which is why we really like working with them, because at EMI, and we're a big believer that, you know, the whole reason that we started doing what we're doing is because I used to get sent to those kind of generic PM boot camps that are out there that weren't really overly beneficial. So obviously we've done that differently at EMI, but by working with Talent Matters now, we've been able to add even another aspect of personalized experience. And really, we just found a lot of interesting stuff in working together on some of the stuff we're doing, which is what we want to kind of talk about today. So To that end, Collin, EMI and Talent Matters have teamed up to create an assessment specifically for AEC project managers utilizing the Harrison assessment. And for those unfamiliar, can you maybe describe what the Harrison assessment is, its primary purpose, and kind of how it stands out from some of the other assessment tools out there?
Great question. I think it's probably a good place to start would be describing, letting you know that the Harrison is not a new tool. It's been around since 1990. It was designed by Dr. Harrison himself, and it was designed for the singular purpose of helping organizations hire the right people, to accelerate the development of their people, to create retention solutions for their people, and to promote the right people. So it's got a very singular focus to be used in the work environment. So that's point number one. I think it's also important to know that the Harrison assessment is not a personality assessment. It's actually a behavioral assessment. And I think what makes the Harrison so unique is the fact that it is job specific and that we get to use it as a research platform, which is obviously what we got to do with you through the study of project managers and creating this competency, is actually using the tool, kind of reverse engineering it and identifying certain traits that are characteristic to certain people and certain jobs and things like that, and then using those analytics for the purpose of development. Harrison assessment also has some interesting lenses that you look through to really make sense of the reports. And I'll just briefly speak to two of those. Probably the most important sort of foundational theory that the Harrison is built upon is this theory called enjoyment performance theory, which suggests that when we enjoy certain behaviors, we tend to repeat them often. And as we repeat them, we tend to improve. And as we improve in those things, we start getting positive feedback. So that's a very important lens that we look through in order to really understand those behaviors that are important for a specific role. When people enjoy those behaviors, that's when we get true fulfillment and alignment between what a job requires and what a person prefers doing.
That's great. And I just want to say a couple of things real quick, Collin, just from us working with you guys in terms of the Harrison, because obviously, you guys are experts in it and we're coming from the outside lens. But what I can say I've learned from it, just kind of with a rudimentary knowledge of it, is what Collin spoke about in terms of job specific is something that I really like about it as opposed to other tools out there. So there is a library of competencies within the Harrison. So if you were to take the Harrison assessment, your organization could identify, what you do on a regular basis. Like for me, they could maybe find civil engineer in that library and check it off, which means that the information that gets returned to me is really specific to the job that I'm doing on a daily basis, which is not something I think that you see with a lot of tools out there. The other thing that I like about it, going back to what Collin said, is the behavioral aspect of it. When we work with organizations in the engineering industry to build leadership or project management development programs, many of them will use other tools. And there are a lot of great tools out there. You could have DISC, Myers-Briggs, different types of tools, some of them personality assessments, etc. And they do bring awareness to people. Yeah. But they're most likely the results are going to be the same over the long term. In other words, if I take it today and I take it in 5 years, it's going to be very similar. What's nice about the Harrison is that if I took it today, I got some information back about some of my behaviors, my strengths and my weaknesses, and I worked on them and took it again in a year or two, I could see some real improvements in terms of those types of behaviors. And when you're doing learning and development like we do at EMI, that was obviously something that was very attractive around this tool, which made us want to try to implement it into our programs. And so going back to the competencies that we talked about, that's kind of how we hooked up with Luke and Collin and said, listen, we love the library of competencies. Could we potentially build one just for project managers in the AEC industry? And so if you're listening to this and you're an AEC project manager, you can understand the value of getting some feedback on your behaviors related to project management in your industry. So I just kind of wanted to really kind of give that overview because, again, just from someone who's not in the Harrison every day like both of you guys are, just to try to see if I understand it because we're still learning it every day. But would you say that that's a good overview, Collin? Or?
I would, and it's good news too, that behaviors are things that we can change, and oftentimes making small little adjustments or having having a new framework to operate from can really make a huge difference in someone's personal growth and effectiveness.
Absolutely. And so, Luke, now that we kind of have a feel for what the Harrison assessment is, could you explain how our companies collaborated to tailor this tool, like I just mentioned, for AEC project managers? Specifically, how does it measure some of the key competency strengths and areas for improvement that are essential for effective project management?
Yeah. Starting off, I'll explain that, like Collin was talking about, the Harrison will measure 175 behavioral tendencies, preferences, work environment, engagement factors for an individual. But the really important second thing that it does that Collin highlighted is it tells you the behaviors that matter for a specific job. And so that's what we set out to help you do in project management. You asked us, hey, can we measure the behaviors that matter for different areas of project management, for initiating a project, for planning a project, all the way to executing, monitoring, and closing a project? And yes, the Harrison is a great way to do that. So that's what we did. And we do it in two ways. We study those areas of project management qualitatively. We worked with you to design and identify what's important to each of those areas. What are the key performance measurements? What are the things and the tasks, the specific behaviors someone has to, or results someone has to achieve in each of those areas of project management? And we created that rating tool to be able to look at those areas of project management. Then on the quantitative side, we gathered lots of PMs from several different organizations, I think well over 75 PMs, and we're able to assess their behavioral data through the Harrison assessment and compare that with where they excel as project managers, whether it's planning or executing or closing, and maybe even areas where they can improve and get better, working with their leaders to rate those areas. And then analyzing that data, we're able to identify the behaviors that actually correlate to being successful in each of those areas. We know the traits that are most important. We call those essential behaviors, the things someone's going to need to use every day in that area. So in executing, it came out that problem solving, being able to make decisions, being able to be persistent despite overcoming obstacles were essential to executing a project. We're also able to identify kind of secondary supporting behaviors, those things that kind of come along someone in that area of executing a project, for example, and make sure they have what is needed to be successful, like being organized or being precise. And then one of the great parts about the Harrison is it doesn't only measure the things we need, but it also can help us identify where we have a behavioral imbalance that can actually undermine our good intentions and derail our results and help and make it so we don't achieve the result as well as we could have. For example, being precise but slow, or being clear in our communication but not diplomatic, so we're blunt. And those we call traits to avoid. And so that's important because when we have those essential traits, those supporting traits, and those traits to avoid for each area of project management, we can help an individual see where their behavioral preferences align with the needs of that area of project management. And where there are strengths, they can now more intentionally leverage those strengths to execute a project, leverage that persistence, leverage that problem-solving skill or decision-making skill set when executing a project. But from the development side, you also get to identify, a project manager can identify where there may be a gap. There's a behavior that's uncomfortable for me, and now I know it's needed for this area of my job. And I can start to reframe that behavior. Before, it was uncomfortable, awkward for me, similar to like picking up and writing your name with your non-dominant hand. And you're able to reframe that behavior in a positive context and start to utilize it more intentionally, develop that skill set. And the great thing about it is it not only makes you more effective in managing projects or whatever specific job you're working on your behaviors in, it also reduces your stress because you start to enjoy the behaviors you need to use every day to be successful. And that's less stressful, and you enjoy your work more, and you're more likely to give discretionary effort. And that gets us into where this tool helps organizations as well. It helps us achieve that win-win, that mutual benefit, because organizations can use the analytics to identify trends of where project managers need to develop their behavioral adaptability, or identify a specific area where they can improve their training process and focus on an area of project management, maybe initiating projects, and give more focus to that for their project managers, because they know it's going to improve the organization's results on projects, make clients more happy because the experience is better, the result is better, but also their project management teams are going to be more engaged, more fulfilled in their work because they're enjoying the things they have to do throughout the day.
That's great. Yeah, and we're going to dive a little bit more into some of the benefits to individuals and companies in a minute. But one thing I just want to say, kind of recapping a little bit of the process that Luke mentioned there, was, first of all, definitely a big thanks to our clients. We had about approximately 10 clients offer up about 10 PMs each to get kind of around that 100 mark of PMs that went through the assessment, where we were able to get the information needed to create this competency specifically, which we call the AEC PM behaviors. And again, just to be clear on this, because I think this is important, is those 100 project managers weren't all great project managers. When you look at their performance, we needed to get a cross-section. Some PMs that were performing really well in their firms, some PMs that were more along the lines of average performance within their firms, and then some that were kind of performing below average, and where firms really wanted to see them improve. So by getting a cross-section of PMs that are executing or performing at different levels, we were able to take that information, and then we actually had each one of their managers rate them, go through a rating process and give them a very specific rating. So collecting all that data allowed us to kind of calibrate this model, of course, with Talent Matters team that went through some of the calculations. So now any PM can just take this on their own. There's no need to get rated anymore, and they can get the results that kind of Luke was taking us through that can be valuable in a lot of ways. And so, Collin, let's dive into that a little bit more here. Can you talk a little bit more about how the assessment tool can benefit both firms and also the individual project managers, kind of what makes it valuable to each?
Sure. Well, on a macro level, I think it really helps firms understand where they have collective strengths, but where do they have gaps, and creating training plans and creating development opportunities to target those specific gaps that come out of the macro view, the analytics that show organizations where people might need some extra training or some development in very specific ways. There's also a lot of really useful views in the analytics at a macro view that lets organizational leadership understand where people are unfulfilled. Understanding, you could look at a cross-section of various offices or even managers who are managing certain people, and to understand and start to target those people who are maybe unengaged or unfulfilled, and to create an intervention plan, or to equip those managers and leaders with useful data that can really help them to manage them and develop them effectively in a way that's meaningful to the project managers themselves. So there's a lot of different, I would call them, analytical views that companies can look at and get a lot of useful data from, and then create a plan to address some of the things that maybe are aligned with their goals, as well as needed for the project managers themselves. So, any comments on that, Anthony?
No, I mean, I was just going to say, I think that the key in today's world really is knowledge sharing and information. And if you're trying to make decisions as an organization around your PM processes, you want to have some data to kind of back up those decisions.
Yeah.
And I think what we're trying to accomplish with this tool, there's not something like this out there, is to be able to give organizations a cross-sectional look at all of their PMs by division, by department, by geography, by service line, and understand their strengths and weaknesses across the 5 PM process groups that we deal with in the engineering world. And one of the other areas where I think this could be really beneficial for a company, and I say this because we're working with a few companies now that are in this situation, is when you have companies that either are acquiring another company or merging with another company, right? Because now you're taking PM practices from one organization and PM practices from another organization and bring these project managers together and you have to kind of create some kind of integration, right? And so if you're able to use a tool like the AEC PM behaviors assessment and you assess project managers across the two organizations, you can see if there's alignment in their strengths and weaknesses, if there's is one company so much stronger in one area of project management and one is so much stronger in another, and how can you leverage that? So I definitely think that there's a lot of ways, in addition to some of the ways already that Luke and Collin have mentioned, that this data can be tremendously helpful. And the one other thing that I'll mention, which we didn't mention explicitly, although I think we've kind of mentioned the different aspects of it, is because there's a library of competencies with the Harrison, you can look at someone's results in different competencies if you wanted to run another report. So for example, you can look at my results as a civil engineer, but then you can also toggle on the AEC PM behaviors competency and you can get those results from me for my project manager duties. And I also think that that's an important thing to note, because in the consulting world, and I'm sure many of you listening to this experience this thing, you're not usually only a project manager.
Yeah.
A project manager is like another hat that you're wearing. So it's nice that there's an option for people to, even as a performance tool, as some other options, to give you feedback in the different roles and responsibilities that you have.
And I'll add one
Great
thing,
point.
that the importance of it being a behavioral specific tool is it helps a project manager or an individual to get laser specific on the things they can improve. And that matters because sometimes it's only a small tweak that we need to make to a big impact in the results we're having. That's why the professionals in all areas of the world still have coaches and work on very specific tweaks in their behavior, whether it's a professional athlete, a professional musician, professional artist. Even though they're the best in their realm, they still continue to look for those things they can optimize, improve, and practice. And just knowing I'm good at project management or I'm bad at project management doesn't give me anything to work on. But when you have a very specific behavior, you can start to practice and improve, just like adjusting your swing or your free throw or your use of an instrument, things like that. It can make all the difference in making you that much more effective in what you're doing every day and increase the sense of fulfillment, not to mention the benefit to the organization and the client.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. That's great. So, Collin, the other thing that I wanted to ask you to elaborate on a little bit is how this tool provides PMs individually with an individual performance evaluation that they can use through PM training. We do a lot of PM training at EMI, and we do custom programs, which is helpful because it does customize it to the organization. But this tool really allows you to take it one step further and give the individual a better experience.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, first of all, I think when you think about equipping project managers and training project managers, it's an easy mistake to make to forget to create a personal development opportunity that goes along with that project manager training. And that's exactly what the Harrison assessment and the PM behaviors tool can really do for a individual project manager, is to provide that individual development track that goes along with a PM training program. More specifically, as Luke just mentioned, it does provide with laser focus those very specific behaviors that, if developed, could make a significant impact on the performance of a project manager within a specific process group, And I wanted to just go back to what you mentioned, Anthony. I think it's really important and a very unique characteristic of the Harrison assessment, which is we're not just looking at what enables people to be successful, but we're also identifying what is it that really undermines or causes people to fail. And, if you just reflect on your own life and certain career situations, almost all the time people end up, not working out, not because they couldn't do the job, but because there was some behavioral suitability issue that really made them a challenge. And so that's where the Harrison can really also provide value on an individual basis by letting project managers know, hey, this specific behavioral tendency that you have is undermining your good intentions. It is a blind spot for you. And then it provides a roadmap or a way to get out of that, which is, again, the kind of the good news that comes along with this tool is it doesn't just diagnose the problem. It also provides you with the framework for what you can do in order to develop yourself out of that situation by learning new skills. And speaking of frameworks, I've found nothing quite so useful from a developmental standpoint for an individual project manager than to learn to lead project from a paradoxical leadership standpoint. So that's, I think, the learning to lead projects paradoxically is a very unique framework to operate from, and I think it equips project managers with a different mindset, which is that instead of doing what they're comfortable doing, or doing what they've always done, or doing what's worked for them in the past, learning to lead paradoxically means that they're able to adapt their behaviors to the situation and to let the situation determine what's needed rather than what I've always done or what's comfortable. So I think that's a very unique framework to operate from, because it ultimately leads to growth as a project manager, and can help them to develop new skills in what we like to think of as adaptive capacity. So those are two specific ways where I think that it really helps project managers grow individually. But there are many other capabilities and tools that are offered through the process that do provide unique value at different stages of the talent management life cycle.
Yeah, that's great. And I think the one thing that I'll just kind of say in terms of that individual aspect is, and again, going a little bit back to the example I shared earlier, because I'm sure a lot of our listeners are individual PMs that might go through a program of some sort. And like I said, when I was practicing as an engineer, I would get sent to the PM boot camps a lot of the times. And those are typically like, I'll say generic. I mean, the content is often very good in terms of project management and the process groups, but it's not specific, of course, to one's company. So you're getting some general information, and then you're tasked with going back and trying to apply it on your own in an organization that isn't necessarily speaking that same exact language as the training. So obviously that's challenging. What we do at EMI, of course, is customizing it. So now we're trying to take the process groups and customize them to what your firm does, your verbiage, your tools, your templates, which of course can make it easier when you go through a training like that. However, what it still lacks is, I think, what this tool provides, which is, let's say you were to take the AEC PM behaviors assessment and you were able to get some kind of a debrief on your report, whether it was individual or whether it was with a group, before you started that custom training program. So now you're understanding that you have some specific weaknesses in the initiating portion of the project or the closing portion of the project. And as you go through that training now, you have your report, you have some of your weaknesses, and you can try to really focus on improving them through this training program.
Yeah.
So you can kind of see the different levels. You have a generic program, which makes it very difficult to translate back to what you're doing. You have a custom one specific to your company, a little bit easier because you understand some of the verbiage and the templates. But then your company's program, along with some of your specific weaknesses that you can now work on throughout that program, to me, it just gives kind of the best of both worlds for, again, firms and individuals, because the firm's going to get the best return on investment if the individual is really taking the most out of the program and becoming kind of that best PM that you can be. So that's really what we've liked about this whole process, is it does provide that very individual aspect to what's typically a group training exercise when you go through a PM training, which is, I think, very valuable.
Yeah, I agree with everything you say. And, isn't that just the truth of it all, though, which is you got to be willing to get into the weeds with people, because we're all different and we all have unique needs from a developmental standpoint. And if we treat everyone the same, then we're just going to get average results. But as leaders, if we're willing to get into the weeds with people and understand what their unique needs are and how to develop those behaviors, then that's what leads to true growth, right? And leads to the best outcome for the person, the project manager, the project manager's manager, as well as the organization.
Yeah. And I think what's valuable about this whole process, when you think about it, is from a firm standpoint, is your project managers are so important to the growth and sustainability of your organization long-term, because in our industry, your product is projects, and project managers are driving how successful your projects are. So again, going back to my example, if someone would go to a generic training, maybe they take 20% of that and transfer it back to the job and get a little bit better. If they go to a custom training, maybe they take back 40 or 50% of that and get that much better. If they go to the custom training and they get the individual aspect of it with the assessment, maybe now they're transferring 75% of that back to the job and really becoming a much better PM. And that's going to go back to the bottom line of the project. So I think if you're thinking about this individually or from a firm standpoint, if there's one area where you want to invest, it's your project managers, because they're driving really the growth of your firm long term. And I think going a little bit back to what Collin said earlier, from a recruiting standpoint, not only are you going to improve your PMs with a process like this, but because most firms don't provide this kind of development experience, you're less likely to lose those PMs to go somewhere else, because they're getting the assessment here. They're getting that insight to their own personal PM behaviors, and they're able to work on them and grow out. So I think that there's lots of different values and different ways here that we're trying to express. And I guess, Luke, the one other kind of value driver that I want you to talk a little bit about here is, how does the Harrison assessment support long-term career development for project managers beyond even the immediate performance improvements that we're talking about here?
Yeah. Well, it does that in a couple ways. One is it provides you with a framework and a common language, a framework personally and a common language amongst the group to think about what it means to optimize how you're doing something. We all know that you need to know what you're doing. You need to have the skills to successfully make a schedule, to create project scope, and make sure everything's happening according to the timeline. But you also have to know how to do it in the most optimal way. And so the good thing about this process is I get a snapshot in time, like we've been talking about, of how my current behavioral tendencies help me and how they might be hurting me. But in order to see that, I have to understand this framework of how behaviors are the thing that support everything we do. Just like when we communicate, it's commonly understood that it's not just about the words I'm saying to you, it's also about my tone, my body language, how I say something. That's the same with everything we do in work or in life. It's not just about the skill I'm implementing at the time, it's how I do it. And so when you go through a process like this, you get an understanding of why are behaviors paradoxical, like Collin was just talking about. The most effective communicators are the ones that know what to say and how to say it. In Harrison speak, we say you must be both frank and diplomatic. Many of us just naturally really prefer one of those behaviors over the other. Often, those of us that prefer being diplomatic, we might have a fear of offending someone, or we've worked for someone that's been overly frank and blunt, and so we avoid that behavior. On the other end, we might be very direct in our communication because we tell it like it is. We don't want there to be any confusion, and we're worried about, we see diplomatic as being overly soft or inefficient or something like that. But what the most effective communicator does, and what the Harrison allows you to do, is see both of these behaviors for the value they bring individually in a paradoxical framework. They seem opposite, that's what a paradox is, but they actually go together. There's an underlying truth in putting them together. So you walk away from the Harrison not just with a snapshot in time of my current behavioral tendencies, but a behavioral framework and really a really effective leadership theory to understand how I become more and more effective throughout the rest of my life. The first time I took the Harrison myself was over 7 years ago, and I still draw on those things I learned when I first learned that framework and how I operate every day and how I do things, not just what I do. The other thing it does is it's not just about what are the things I need to fix. The Harrison also reveals for me, helps me understand the things that are important to me at work. What are my wants? What's important to me? Is development a priority? Is an advancement a priority? Flexible work time, things like that. And it creates a way for me to talk to my leaders and have that mutually beneficial conversation about that ongoing path of achieving my career goals. So it's not just about the things I need to fix. It's about creating a conversation with my organization about how I can achieve my goals. And that's just another way it helps in the long term because it's putting me on a good path. and facilitating that mutually beneficial conversation with my leaders.
That's great. No, and I like that. And I like the fact that, like you said, it's something that has kind of stayed with you over the years, which kind of tells you that it is pretty impactful in terms of, or impactful or useful, I should say, because I think a lot of tools that are out there, you might take something, you might do something once, but it doesn't necessarily stick with you. And I think that's kind of another one of the value drivers of this tool that can be really beneficial, is you can use it over the long term, like we've talked about here. So, Collin, maybe you can give us one final piece of advice that you might share with project managers just around improving their leadership and PM skills based on your experience and the training that you've done.
Oh, that's a great question. I would say that we are a lifetime of accumulated behavior choices. And oftentimes our behavior just becomes invisible to us because they become habits. And so, as project managers know way better than I do, when you manage a project, perhaps the first step in that process is to manage yourself, right? Because how can you possibly manage a project if you don't know how to manage yourself? And so I would say that in terms of one piece of advice, I would say I would encourage you to explore this idea of looking into the mirror and understanding the impact that your current behaviors are having and how they're affecting your abilities in various project manager tasks. Each of the Project Manager Institute's process groups are very different, from initiating all the way through closing. And each one of those process groups requires a unique ecosystem of behaviors that contributes to the performance of it. And so I would encourage you to consider looking at yourself first and exploring what that might look like to develop specific behaviors that could potentially help you grow deeper roots, which would then support your ability to be more effective as a project manager.
Yeah, that's great. Really what you're trying to do is you're trying to manage projects to the best of your own abilities, taking into account, your behaviors, your strengths, your weaknesses, your tendencies. And again, the tool that we've developed, I think, can help you with that. But I think also it's just something to keep in mind, generally speaking, from a project management and leadership perspective. So that's great. And Luke and Collin, just to mention, there will be Talent Matters is one of the sponsors for our AEC PM Connect event, which is going to be in Kansas City on October 29th. It's an event that we're really excited about. The goal of the event is to bring project managers in the industry together to allow them to connect and talk about some of the important strategies or concepts in project management, like earned value management, like project resourcing. We're going to get into, in our working lunch session, maybe some stuff about behavior assessments and tools and other things that you can use in project management. And Luke and Collin will be there. And if you make it there, definitely you can connect with them, connect with us. You can find information about the event at aecpmconnect.com. And you can also find information about the behavioral assessment at aecpmbehaviors.com. We've got a little video there. We've got some information about it. And we're excited about it because there just isn't something like that out there. And if you're operating as a project manager in our industry, I think any kind of information you can get about yourself that can help you to be more aware of your strengths and some of your weaknesses and where you can make some improvements, I think is beneficial, regardless of the experience level that you're at as a PM, just to help you to be the best project manager you can be. So Luke, Collin, I want to thank you so much for spending some time with us here on the AEC PM podcast, and excited to hook up with you guys in Kansas City. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks, Anthony.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Luke and Collin. This was an awesome and exciting project that EMI went through with Talent Matters to be able to calibrate this tool specifically for AEC project managers. And if you're interested in learning more about it, you can absolutely message us by leaving a comment below, or you can reach out to us at 800-920-4007. If you like the video, please subscribe here. We put out videos like this on a weekly basis to help engineers become better managers and leaders. I'll see you next week.